Joining us once again for his first sit-down interview since President Trump revoked his security clearance in an unprecedented move this week is former CIA Director John Brennan. Director Brennan, thank you again for being here.
Sure.
I want to ask you about this breaking news that we've had tonight from the Washington Post. You can see the headline here: White House drafts more clearance cancellations demanded by Trump. I'll just read you the lead. The White House has drafted documents revoking the security clearances of current and former officials whom President Trump has demanded be punished for criticizing him or for playing a role in the investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election, according to senior administration officials. Trump wants to sign, quote, most, if not all of them, said one senior White House official, who indicated that communication aides, including Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Bill Shind, the new Deputy Chief of Staff, they have discussed the optimum times to release them as a distraction during unfavorable news cycles. Here's the part about you. This senior White House official acknowledged that the step taken this week against John Brennan had been prepared in late July, when Sanders first said Trump was considering it. But the decision to take that step was made this week to divert attention from nonstop coverage of a critical book released by fired Trump aide Omarosa Manigault-Newman. Consideration is being given to holding other prepared documents in reserve for similar opportunities in the future. Do you have any reaction to learning that, according to a White House official, is why the president took this action against you this week?
No, other than this is just another demonstration of his irresponsibility in terms of holding that office. Just because he has these authorities, and he does, he can revoke, and he has revoked my clearances and others, and just the way he can give pardons out. But, and I'm not a lawyer, but I know that there is a question about whether or not there's corrupt intent in terms of doing this. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is the thing that lawyers and courts and others are going to be looking at in terms of whether or not Mr. Trump is doing any of this in order to obstruct justice or to try to silence critics, whatever. But the fact that he's using a security clearance of a former CIA director as a pawn in his public relations strategy, I think is just so reflective of somebody who, quite frankly, I don't want to use this term maybe, but he's drunk on power. He really is. And I think he's abusing the powers of that office. I think right now this country is in a crisis in terms of what Mr. Trump has done and is liable to do. And so are the Republicans on the Hill who have given him a pass, are they going to wait for a disaster to happen before they actually find their backbones and spines to speak up against somebody who clearly is not carrying out his responsibilities with any sense of purpose and common sense from the standpoint of national security?
When you raise that kind of a prospect, what kind of disaster are you envisaging?
I don't know. I mean, look how he's just tossing around these things right now. What happens if he wants to do something on the foreign front in terms of some type of military adventure? You know, the wag the dog scenario as a way to distract attention as things get increasingly tough for him and the waters get even choppier. How desperate is he going to become? What else is he going to do in order to distract attention? And so I really am quite surprised. I'm very disappointed in many of the Republican members of Congress, a lot of them who I know well and respect, but for whatever reason, they are turning a blind eye and making excuses for someone who doesn't deserve to be given this type of leash with the authorities of the office of the presidency.
The authority that he is exerting here is, again, an untested one because no president has ever been known to use a security clearance like a weapon this way, or the revocation of a security clearance this way. One of the other things that's discussed in this breaking news from the Washington Post tonight is that there's particular concern expressed even within the White House about the president's statement today that he intends very quickly to strip the clearance of a current Justice Department official, Bruce Ohr. Some people have suggested that depending on what Mr. Ohr's actual job is at the Justice Department right now, stripping his security clearance might actually effectively be a way of firing him if he needs a security clearance to do his job.
Absolutely, it would be. Mm-hmm.
Is the president exercising a new authority here to essentially fire people, disable people from being able to do their jobs, even if he's constitutionally unable to fire that official?
I think he's out of control. He has the steering wheel of the American vehicle in his hands, and he's veering wildly right now. He's trying to preserve and protect himself. And so what more demonstration do you want? When things get really, really bad, I'm glad that if his revoking of my security clearance is going to wake some people up, And look at all the people who have come and spoken out. You know, the icons of the national security intelligence community over the past several decades, saying enough is enough. And so when are the members of Congress and the Republican Party going to say enough is enough? This country is more important than Mr. Trump. This country is more important than party affiliation. I'm waiting for it. I'm hoping for it. And I truly hope that it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
Because the president has overtly today raised this prospect of going after this current Justice Department official, his security clearance, raised the question for me as to whether he might do that to the Attorney General, who he has criticized in unsparing terms, including this week calling him not a real Attorney General, or to the Deputy Attorney General who oversees the Mueller investigation, or to FBI Director Chris Wray.
Or Bob Mueller, or the team of investigators there.
Yeah. That was raised publicly by former DNI James Clapper this week. I wondered what you thought about that.
Well, I think it just demonstrates that anything is possible with Mr. Trump in the Oval Office, that he has these authorities, and he can yank the security clearances of basically anybody he wants. I think it is subject to challenge, but if he decided to yank the clearances tomorrow, the investigators who are working on this, the special counsel's effort, they're not going to have access to classified information they need to do their jobs. So again, how desperate is he going to get? And do the Republicans really want to have to clean up after a disaster? Or do they want to stop this before it becomes disastrous? It's their choice. And if things become disastrous, it's going to be on their shoulders, on their conscience.
You have said that since you left the CIA, you have returned to the agency several times, specifically to review materials in order to prepare yourself for congressional testimony or for questioning by congressional staffers. Will the loss of your clearances affect your ability to do that?
I've returned to the CIA twice to talk about, in support of my congressional testimony. I had to go back and review the files just to make sure I was able to respond to their questions. One other time, a senior CIA official asked me to come in to talk about things, and that was with using my security clearances so I could talk freely about things. Another time, Director Pompeo, when he was there, who every year the director of CIA usually invites back former directors to give them updates on what's happening in the CIA, as well as some substantive briefings. I have never gone into CIA to ask for any type of briefing. I've never gone in there to access any type of computer. So again, I'll be fine, and I don't want to get anybody in CIA in trouble, in terms of their reaching out to me. And I think there has been a chilling effect on the part of what Mr. Trump is doing and his characterization of me, that I think CIA officers are pretty reluctant to be found out that they, consulted me about a matter.
With now nearly every living director and former director of the CIA speaking out in support of you today.
In support of the principle of security clearances not being political tools.
And also in support of you personally. There's personal praise and support for you there, too. Even among former officials who say they don't always agree with your criticism of the president, they support you and reject any allegation that you've mishandled your security clearance in any way. With 60 former CIA officials joining their own letter today and joining that on, this is becoming a larger issue, not a smaller one, in terms of the public debate on this matter. Speaking of the public debate on this matter, can I chain you to the desk for one more segment?
Sure.
All right, we'll be right back with former CIA Director John Brennan. Thank you.